sort of have that connection to the west. So it just may be leaving one or two lots as grassland to enable that connection in the future. So definitely we are willing to work with that in terms of keeping a connection, but we would not support eliminating the road pattern connection to the west. And then secondly, planning staff still do support our recommendation in terms of having that conceptual servicing plan at the draft plan stage. And so we would not support the third request to council to remove that additional servicing requirement.
Councillor Wells.
Much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I certainly want to congratulate staff, and I want to say how pleased I am that, with regard to number 2, that they would work with the Lawrence and Mr. Valley to see if they can do something with that stub, and I thank you very much for that.
Councillor Brunton.
Well, Mayor Luke, thank you. If staff aren't willing to compromise on this number 3, I'm concerned that the cost may be too extensive for the developer. And I'm wondering if staff would go back, talk to Mr. Valley, and look at things in terms of possibly some form of front-ending agreement. Is that possible?
Through the chair, I will turn that over to our Public Works Division, to Lee Robinson, to comment.
Through the mayor to council, to be clear that what staff are asking for, and I think perhaps there was a misunderstanding, we're not looking for detailed engineering. We're looking for concepts and preliminary work. It's not we're not asking for a full-blown secondary plan by these at any way, shape, or form. We are looking for some general concepts, some general ideas. It's a preliminary servicing from a general point of view, not where the sewer's going to run, but we need some very basic concepts looked at as part of this. It's not a huge cost. With regards to council, if council directs staff to have the appropriate funds to enter into a cost-sharing agreement, staff are more than happy to do that. There isn't currently funding approved for us to be able to put that option on the table.
Well, if I may, Mayor Luke, I'd like to see staff and Mr. Valley sit down and discuss that further. I just don't want to see this thing come to an end because of cost. And I don't know if Mr. Valley's favorable to what Lee has said. If he is, I'm willing to leave the item 3 in there. Mr. Valley could comment on that possibly. Number 3.
You're suggesting we leave his third request in?
If, from what our county engineer has said, it's not as detailed. I'm reading the report, recommendation number 3 on page 160, and I kind of look at that as a fairly extensive work in the recommendations in the staff report. And I guess, I don't know how Mr. Valley feels, but if it's too extensive and too costly, it's up to the developer to say, we're done.
I'll ask Mr. Valley to come to the microphone, and while he's doing that, back to, for clarification from Lee Robinson, item 3 on what Mr. Valley is proposing here is that we direct staff to remove the requirements for additional servicing. I didn't hear you say that you would agree to that. I did hear something about you would be willing to talk to the developer and Mr. Valley. Do you want to just make it clear here what we're asking Mr. Valley?
To be clear, my position is that we should not be fulfilling the request of Mr. Valley with respect to removing the third condition on his list. That's very important from an infrastructure point of view. We don't want to, from a long-term county infrastructure point of view, end up with undersized infrastructure that has to be removed and replaced to facilitate future development far in advance of its expected life capacity. It doesn't make any sense to pull out a 20-year-old sewer to replace it with a larger sewer. This kind of information is very helpful going forward with respect to that. So I guess my recommendation is not to do that. The intention from the staff report is not to be a detailed engineering. We're not looking for detailed engineering design. We're looking for general concepts. And I believe what Councillor Brunton was suggesting is that staff work with Mr. Valley so that he's able to produce that information, as it's not as detailed as Councillor Brunton originally believed it to be. I don't know if I've actually answered the question or if I've just totally talked in a circle.
You've answered my question. We've had our public meeting. So at this point, we're not going to continue to negotiate with Mr. Valley. We have staff recommendations. We have some recommendations for consideration from Mr. Valley. It does not matter to me as chair whether you adopt these or this or both or none. That's where we're at right now. You got to give me direction for us to get into debate, and we're not there yet. Councillor Columbus, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, with all the changes of thinking here, can we ask that this item be deferred to a report so that Mr. Agan and his agent meet with our county staff planning department to address outstanding issues pertaining to subdivision layout and subdivision layout of the development?
I'll answer your question, Councillor Columbus. Yes, you can ask for a deferral. A deferral motion is in order. Do you want to continue?
Well, then I would put that on the floor, Mr. Mayor.
You move that we defer this application
Yes.
and turn it back to staff to discuss further? Something of that nature? Thank you. Do I have a seconder for deferral? Councillor Wells, thank you. Okay, so if you can just give me that deferral, it's Columbus and Wells. Now we have a motion on the floor. Now we can debate. Councillor Oliver, please.
Mr. Mayor, you may rule me out of order, and that's okay if you do, but
Well, we'll see
while
what
I
you got
can
to say.
support a
Go ahead.
deferral, I think Mr. Valley legitimately has asked us to provide direction relative to the third point on his issues, and that is whether or not his client should be required to pay for engineering studies on the adjacent lands. Are you willing to let us talk about that before we deal with the deferral matter? Because if we're going to defer without giving direction to staff, then we're not really changing the status quo relative to that point. And I think it's important. I, for one, would like to indicate my wish relative to that third point.
Just give me a second. I know you're writing there, Mr. Clerk, but you can multitask. I understand that a motion to defer is debatable.
Through you, Mr.
Go ahead. You know what I'm asking.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this isn't so much a deferral as a referral of the matter back to staff. And in of such, you kind of do have to give staff some direction on what new report they're supposed to do or bring forward to council.
So this is a referral, and you're writing it up as such. Right? Continue, Councillor Oliver.
Okay with it. Yeah.
You're in order, Councillor
All
Oliver.
right, thank you very much.
Yes, please.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate that very much. The only point I want to make, and Mr. Valley at one point did refer us to the wording in the bylaw amendment, or in the bylaw, which is on page 305 of our agenda. And notwithstanding what Ms. Robinson just said in terms of it being a simple overview, when you look at the bullets that are there, it's a fairly detailed engineering study on all of those lands. It talks about wastewater servicing, including sewage pumping stations, water main servicing, including required infrastructure to ensure appropriate pressures, traffic flow, road networks, including connections to all balanced lands, stormwater management, including stormwater management ponds. That is beyond the scope of the subject lands, in my view. And so I, for one, Mr. Mayor, would like to give staff direction that, that we remove, as part of this referral back to them, that they understand they are to remove the requirements for additional servicing and engineering studies on the adjacent lands and only require such studies for the subject lands. Mr. Valley pointed out to us on page 179 of our agenda. This is a pretty important paragraph, I think, relative to this. It should be noted that in this instance, due to the nature of the proposed development and the separate ownership parcels, planning staff are satisfied that the developer has provided staff with enough detail to ensure orderly development, which would not preclude future logical development from taking place on the remaining balanced land. So I think we've almost said ourselves, they don't need to do this work on the adjacent lands in order to be able to go ahead with this particular development. If Mr. Egging ends up buying some of those other lands, he's going to have to pay for that work in the future anyways. If he doesn't, someone else develops it someday, I feel he should not be expected to pay for those costs on those adjacent lands. So that would be what I hope Mr. Mayor will give as direction on that point when this is referred back to staff.
I'll go to the mover on that. Councillor Columbus, is that what, you agreement to that?
I would be in agreement with that, yes.
I'll ask the seconder, Councillor Wells, are you in agreement with that? Columbus has moved, Wells has seconded that staff report DCS 17-62 be referred back to staff for further discussion with the applicant, and that staff remove the requirements for additional work on adjacent lands. That work maybe not the best, I just was writing quickly. Councillor Oliver, additional?
Mr. Mayor, that's the intent of what you're saying there.
Okay,
Yep, thank you.
yes. Lee, please, help, help, help.
Through the mayor to council, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to it. If that is what is going to be passed, referring it back to staff isn't going to accomplish anything. That's just simply deleting that clause, and you're going to send it back to staff, who will send you back the exact same report that's in front of you, minus those sentences. So what I'm saying is, if that is what council is desirous of, is to not require the developer to review the infrastructure to determine whether or not it's actually going to be serviced appropriately, then there's no point in sending it back to staff, because the instructions that were just provided actually effectively eliminate that portion of the recommendation. So there isn't anything else for staff to work on that would effectively implement Mr. Valley's third request.
Well, she's right, that we don't have to give the direction then to give us the same direction back. Councillor Oliver.
Yeah, and I agree with Lee on that point, Mr. Mayor, but I thought still relative to the road stub issues and the layout of the roads, that matter, I think planning staff said they could discuss with Mr. Valley alternatives and options to what was in our draft bylaws. So I think that was what I was assuming would still be referred back.
Through the mayor to council, as part of the stuff that staff are asking, the conceptual area servicing plan, which is not detailed it's not detailed engineering by any such, talks about the road network. So if you eliminate that, then we don't have the ability to review that road issue either. So I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think the resolution is saying what council is desirous of happening the way it's currently worded.
She lost me just at the very end.
The conceptual area servicing includes traffic patterns and
Yes.
road networks.
Right.
So if you eliminate that, then we don't have, then the stub has also been, the entire discussion about the stub has been eliminated. So by eliminating the areas, the area concept, the conceptual area servicing plan, you've eliminated anything other than just, yes, we accept the plan as it is. And I want to make sure that the direction that council is seeking is, I don't want you to send it back and have us come back and say, we can't do what you asked us to do because of the resolution. I was just trying to prevent that.
Councillor Wells?
Well, Mr. Mayor, it would seem to me if the motion doesn't accomplish what Councillor Oliver is suggesting, what is the point of having the motion? And I will withdraw my name from the seconder.
Thank you.
That doesn't make sense.
I see you. I'm just looking here because I don't have a seconder now, and we're either going to have the mover take his name off, or I'm going to ask for a seconder, because we can't debate without a seconder. Mr. Columbus, Councillor Columbus.
Mayor, my original statement was to defer to staff for a future report and to consult with Egging's agent to address outstanding issues pertaining to subdivision layout and servicing of the development. And that includes anything and everything with respect to this property. Does that satisfy? All I want to do is get the planning staff to communicate further with Mr. Egging's agent to come up with a solution here.
that would certainly accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, yes.
There you go, Mr. Clerk. Can you put that one on too?
I sure hope you get a second. Do you want to just?
That's what I.
It should refer it for a staff report. It's been moved by Councillor Columbus, seconded by Councillor Sonnenberg, that the staff report be referred back to staff for further discussion with the applicant to address outstanding issues with the subdivision layout and servicing. Sonnenberg? Discussion. Oh, come on, you guys aren't going to quit yet. If not, those in favor? Carried. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a 10-minute break. We have one more application, and, well, he was here. He's probably taken off, and, oh, he's gone to the washroom. And I just want to let you know that we have one staff report tonight that is time-sensitive because there's a lot of money we'd like to get from the upper tier government, and that is 12B. That's the restoration, which is 50/50, and it's time-sensitive. So keep that in mind. We'll see you back at 25 after 8. We may have to extend our curfew a few moments. Thank you. I will be ready in 1 minute to start. Thank you. Boy, I'll tell you, if these people I can tell you when Dover was 3,000 feet. Yeah, you really go, that's like me moving to Victoria saying I don't want two more houses built or one more street put in. I have a quorum, I'm ready to go. So I'll get back and call the meeting to order. We are on staff report DCS 1763. This application has been received to draft plan approval to approve a subdivision on the subject lands to create blocks 1 to 6 in a public road known as Dover Coast Boulevard for the following uses: a residential retirement home, Block 1, commercial medical center, Block 2, 3, 4, residential mid-rise, Block 5, and commercial hotel slash banquet hall slash convention center. The Ontario number is there. The agent is MHBC Planning, and they have put forth the application affecting the lands described as New Lakeshore Road, Port Dover. In your agenda, we're on page 221. I will now open the public meeting upon the staff report 17-63. Matt, and I know which one's Matt. Matt, thanks for waiting. It's been a long evening. Go ahead, Matt.
You're welcome, thank you. The subject lands are located on the east side of the urban area of Port Dover. Dover Coast is a mixed-use community made up of low and medium-density residential development and future commercial development, including a future hotel. The entire community is surrounded by a link-style golf course. The subject lands are approximately 10 hectares in area. The subject lands would be accessed via Dover Coast Boulevard and Highway 6. With the exception of phases 1 and 2 and the medical center, the remainder of the lands are presently vacant and not currently approved for development. There is residential land uses to the west and south, and presently the lands to the north of Highway 6 are vacant but are anticipated to eventually be developed with residential dwellings. The purpose of this application is to draft plan approve a plan of subdivision made up of 5 blocks and 2 public roads. To date, within the Dover Coast community, Phase 1 consists of a low-density condominium residential development, which is now complete and built out. Phase 2 consists of a low-density condominium residential development, which has recently been registered and will be built out in the short term. And just as a point of clarification, staff have received a site plan application for a medical center. Staff are content with the plan itself and are just working through the agreement process to complete that. Before any additional development can take place through the registration process, the Ministry of Transportation does require that the community is connected to Highway 6 via Dover Coast Boulevard. Sorry about the drawing is a little faded here. The proposed blocks are illustrated on map 4 of my report. And as Mr. Mayor has outlined, Block 1 is for residential use, which is proposed to be a retirement village. Block 2 is for commercial use, that's the medical center. Block 3 is commercial use. Block 4 is another residential use, perhaps another retirement village. And Block 5 is commercial use, the hotel, golf club, house. And again, just for clarification, tonight we're not talking about establishing new land uses. The land uses are already established in this area. Tonight we're only referring to the subdivision of the land. Here are a couple pictures of the area. They are a bit dated. The development has moved along quite a bit since these were taken. We have received one letter from an area resident with some concerns over those land uses, the commercial uses. In particular, their concerns arise around having commercial activity focused on downtown Dover and not within this area. But again, just to repeat what I said earlier, this application is not to establish new land uses. Those uses are already there. We're just subdividing land. The proposed development will complement the existing and future residential development within the area and provide local residents with housing and employment opportunities. The development will be subject to a number of conditions of approval that will ensure items such as, but not limited to, things like water and wastewater are available, and that the connection of Dover Coast Boulevard to Highway 6 is completed prior to the registration of the draft plan of subdivision. A full list of conditions of approval are attached to my report as Appendix A. Planning staff are of the professional opinion the application is consistent with the policies of the PPS and conforms to the goals and objectives of the Norfolk County Official Plan. The proposed development represents good planning and will add to the economic viability of Port Dover and Norfolk County. Based on these policy review, planning staff recommend approval of this application subject to the attached conditions.
Draft plan approval of a subdivision.
That is correct.
That's the application. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for that clarification. I'll turn it over to council. Any questions to Matt Vaughn? Maybe some later, Matt. I see Mr. Lennox here. Welcome, John. You been here very long? A few minutes? You are here. I will now ask if there's anyone present who wishes to speak in favor of this application, and certainly, Mr. Lennox, if you wish to speak, you can do so now. Thank you. You can come to the podium, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you weren't going to break, I was going to get up just to give my legs a walking as a delegation, but appreciate that. And won't be long tonight. We have reviewed the report. We've been working with staff on the report and continue to work with them as it relates to the site plan and other aspects really of the proposal. With regard to the conditions of approval, again, generally no concerns with how the conditions are written and how they're proposed. Really, it comes down to implementation of those conditions. So how do we satisfy them and how do we register the plan? And the objective is to move forward quickly with registration of the plan to get Dover Coast Boulevard extended to Highway 6. That's our intention. We appreciate, and staff commented on it, that they've been working to follow up with MTO. We've been trying to follow up with MTO, anything that staff can continue to do or council could do to assist. I think we would like just as much as staff to see that road continued and put in place because we know that that's going to be a requirement as future development occurs out there, and it's just something that needs to be done. So we appreciate continued efforts from the county to have those discussions. The second is there's two conditions in the report, and they're fairly general, conditions 9 and 19, and they relate to public works and engineering and completion of studies and reports that really get into detailed design. But one of the key, and it's more in the comments of the public works, which is on page 244 of your package, and it talks about as we work through these studies to fulfill the condition, there's a requirement that the applicant install a water main upgrade on Lakeview Avenue, and there's some details associated with that. And part of that, as we understand it, is related to the development, and the other is also related to upgrading facilities in the existing community. And we've had discussions, and what we would like to have further discussions with staff is the ability to cost share some of that work rather than it all be a development or developer-driven cost. And, we think that would be reasonable, and we think that perhaps the development charges that have been collected previously from this development could be put forward to cost sharing in that regard. So I don't know that it's something that we're going to resolve here tonight. We just wanted to identify that, and we're hopeful that through discussion with staff, we can find a way that that matter is cost shared, because it is there is some development cost, but there's also some costs associated with development within that existing community. So other than that, we have no concerns. We support the staff recommendation, and we look forward to receiving an approval and continuing to move forward with completing the development.
Just before I ask council for questions, Matt, you heard the request from the presenter about cost sharing and putting us on notice they would like to further discuss some of the development charges, et cetera, and well, there were 3 items he mentioned. Would that be something you'd be acceptable to further discuss these?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, planning staff as well as Public Works and Environmental Services staff have met with the applicant and owner in regards to this request. It being an engineer-type request, I would like to defer that question to Lee, please.
Through the mayor to council. With regards to this request, I'd like to point out that the comments that were made on page 244 are just general comments. They don't actually form part of the resolution. What's forming part of the resolution is the draft plan conditions tonight. We believe that the conditions have been written such that there are several different engineering solutions to some of their situations. Some of those engineering solutions will present the opportunities for cost sharing, and some will not.
Okay.
At this time, it would be premature to say whether or not we would cost share, depending on which solution, once they get into the very detailed engineering, will go forward. Should the solution to the situation be such that cost sharing is appropriate, staff would most certainly be bringing forward something back to council, recommending that we cost share it for a variety of reasons. But until we have the actual solution pinned down to a T, we can't 100% say what the cost sharing would be.
Oh, no.
But it's certainly something that we're willing to discuss once the
That's
fine
the answer
details
I'm
are
looking
sorted
for.
out.
Yeah, and I wasn't looking for, yes, we can cost share, no, we can't. You were willing to discuss it. That, I hope, answers your question.
Yes.
I don't think it'll be hammered out tonight.
No, we weren't anticipating
No,
that.
I knew that. Okay, so, Councillor Wells, we'll start with you, please.
Mr. Mayor, just for information's sake and a ballpark figure, have you got any idea what costs we might be incurring, or just a ballpark figure? I'm not holding you to it.
I don't know. What I understand is through our engineer just being part of the discussions, it's here what's being proposed. If it were all the development costs, would be 100 to 200,000. But I don't know.
Thank you, Mr.
Any further questions? Is there anyone, oh, do you have anything further?
No,
I'm
that
kinda
was all.
just-
I was done. Just we're looking forward to moving forward.
Looking forward to moving forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in attendance who wishes to speak in favor of this application? Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in general or in opposition to this application? Okay, anything further from council? Councillor Wells.
Ms. Robinson, if she would kind of suggest that that ballpark figure would be the same as it was indicated, $100,000 to $200,000, is that what she would estimate it to be? Roughly.
Through the mayor to council, again, there's a couple of different engineering solutions. I think that estimate is probably fairly reasonable for one of the solutions that's possible. I would say that depending, it's really hard because I don't know what the exact solution is. one of them that has been floated around, yes, that would be a reasonable assumption, that the total value of the work would be probably in the neighborhood of 150,000. And we would have to do running some numbers for cost sharing and all that sort of stuff. Some of that will require the replacement of existing infrastructure, at which point we would definitely be cost sharing on that, simply because the existing infrastructure does require replacement anyway. And that would have been an expense we would have paid anyway.
So when this report comes due, you will have in your report that you were expecting cost sharing to take place so that the applicant would know? Is that how this is going to work?
Through the mayor to council, if this resolution is approved this evening, the draft plan conditions will be in place. The applicant has a certain period of time to fulfill those. As part of fulfilling those, we will hammer out what would be the appropriate thing, and we would be bringing back a separate report recommending that council enter into a cost-sharing agreement for these works.
Okay.
So that will take place before the draft plan is cleared.
Any further questions? I need a mover and seconder to close. Councillor Wells has moved. Councillor Hyde has seconded that we now close the public meeting. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. What's your wishes? Councillor Hyde, please.
Move the recommendation.
Thank you very much, sir. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sonnenberg? Hyde has moved. Sonnenberg is seconded. That the application by John Lennox, 169 Lakeshore Road in Port Dover, affecting lands described as lots 14 and 16, concession 1, Woodhouse, Norfolk County, be approved for reasons set out in report number DCS 1763, and that the draft plan of subdivision be subject to the draft plan of subdivision conditions of approval in Appendix A. Discussion. Councillor Black.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I do have a question on the parkland tree planting trails and walkways, page 240, and it's number 17, and it talks about the tree planting plan and that it's to be on public land. And I know we've had a policy that said on private land, and now I guess we've changed our policy. Have we changed our policy on the location of trees?
Through the mayor to council, yes, we have worked out an acceptable location to be placing them in our right-of-ways, so that the trees we have care and control of them.
Okay, so it flipped. It was on private land, and there was a rationale for that, but it's better that we have them on public property because being able to care for them and control them better.
Correct. We made some significant changes in the placement of our infrastructure to ensure that we could place them in an area that council will recall numerous deputations that have experienced difficulties with roots and stuff in their sewers. And so we've made some changes to ensure that that doesn't occur on an ongoing basis, but it allows us to have care and control of those trees.
Okay, so going forward, this will be our policy on public land, not private. And just on the timing of the planting of the trees, because I know I've had lots of calls here in Simcoe on some of the subdivisions that the developer waits until the very end to go around and plant all the trees at once. So this wouldn't happen now because it's on public land?
Through the mayor to council, that is something that, as the fulfillment of the draft plan conditions, we will negotiate with the developer the timing and placement of those trees. One of the things we've implemented is the ability for the developer to pay the county for that, and then the county will in fact place the trees at such time as that we feel is best, and we are fully responsible for those trees.
Okay.
So the developer doesn't have to worry about a warranty period or anything else associated with the trees.
All right, well, it sounds like a better policy than we had before, especially on the timing, because I got a lot of calls from people wondering, when am I going to get my tree? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wells.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, most of you know by now that I'm not the brightest councillor that we have sitting around this table, but I looked here and I don't see anything mention of the word cost sharing in this. Does that come later? Did I miss that? I did hear what you said about cost sharing, but I don't see anything about it in the recommendation.
Through the mayor to council, you are correct. It's not listed in the recommendations. It's not listed in the recommendations because at this point, this is a draft plan approval, which means that it's a very preliminary, high-level approval. We don't have enough detailed information to provide council with that cost sharing. You know, as we all know, these are recorded, so staff have committed to, and to having those discussions, and those discussions will take place. And we have direction from council, and that's sufficient for staff to proceed with that.
Thank you. Anything further on the motion? If not, those in favor? Carried, thank you. I'm looking at the time. I have 2 staff reports I'd like to get finished, plus a very short in-camera thing that is important. We'll do that first. We may have to go a couple minutes over, and I hope that I get support to do that. We're off next week, but that's your call. So, the in-camera session will not take very long. I need a mover to go in camera. Councillor Wells has moved. Thank you, John. And Councillor Oliver second. That council now move in to closed session at 8:45 p.m. to discuss matters pursuant to sections 239 BC DNF of the Municipal Act as amended, as the subject matter pertains to personnel matters about identifiable individuals, including municipal or local board employees, proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board, labor relations or employee negotiations, and is a matter of solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Those in favor? It's carried. This shouldn't be any longer than 3 or 4 minutes. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Sonnenberg, seconded by Councillor Black, that council adjourns this closed session at 8:53 PM and reconvene in an open session. Those in favor? It's carried. Thank you for that. We have one, not a resolution, but certainly announce the results of our in-camera session. This is about the interview and the hiring of a general manager of our employee and business services. In other words, this is the replacement for Candy Webb, who recently retired. It's my pleasure to announce that Mr. Yakov Schlucken, how I did it wrong, Sluchenkov, I know it's Sluchenkov, sorry, Yakov Sluchenkov, is the successful candidate. You know, if I don't think about it, I can say it because I practiced it. Sluchenkov. Yakov is currently employed as the Senior Officer, Labor Relations and Wellness with the Hamilton Police Service. He has experience with the Government of Canada in human resources, compensation and benefits advisor capacity. He is a member of the Board of Directors of the Ontario Municipal Human Resources Association. He holds a master's degree in industrial relations and human resources from the University of Toronto. As well, he has an honors bachelor degree of administrative studies with his specialization in human resources from York University. We are very confident that Mr. Sluchenkov will fit in well with Norfolk County's culture. He will be a valued member, believe me, of our senior leadership team. His effective date to start work is September the 18th, 2017. Mr. County Manager, to you and your your interview and hiring team, thank you for your work on this. Very much appreciate Ms. Johnson, Marlene Miranda as well, and of course, you got that motion to go beyond 9. Let's do that now because we won't be long. We have 2 short items. Did you write it up for me? My apologies. Let's do that. And we're going to go now to the 2 staff reports. It's okay. No. And the first staff report is the SWIFT financing, which you'll find on page 247 of the agenda. This is something that really cannot wait 2 weeks. In fact, anything that's approved in 2 weeks, it's going to take 3 to get it through council.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, just
Go ahead,
to
please.
confirm with council, so everything that we don't address tonight will go to the September 5th council and
September 5th,
committee.
yeah, we've got some stuff. I'll need a mover and seconder to go beyond 9 o'clock. We shouldn't be long. Councillor Geisens has moved. Councillor Oliver has seconded that, notwithstanding the procedural bylaw, council proceed beyond the hour of 9 p.m. to complete time-sensitive matters on the agenda. Any discussion? Those in favor? Thank you very much. That's very much appreciated. These are time-sensitive. So, Swift, Mr. County Manager, if you just go over this and highlight it for us, please.
The draft contract is attached to the back of the report. SWIFT's years in formulation are now, we're at the cusp, or SWIFT is at the cusp of actually rolling out its first RFPs, which will be in November. September 15th is its drop-dead date, where you're either in or you're out. At this point in time, only Huron County, Middlesex County, and Norfolk County have yet to commit. Every other, look across the map, Niagara, Essex, Chatham, Kent, Lambton, Perth, so it goes, are in, Gray, Bruce, I go on. That's not the reason to join. The reason to join is that in the contract, rather than just making promises, the contract specifies that at a minimum, SWIFT guarantees at least a 4-to-1 financial